Hi, welcome to the Voice News Network. Today we are going to discuss a very important subject, one which has a terrible impact on our community in the GTA, the Peel region, and across Canada. According to Statistics Canada, there were over 4,000 suicides in the year 2017, and it has been increasing every year around about 10 or 11%. And many of these are youngsters between the ages of 15 and 35. This is a terrible blow to Canada, apart from the impact it has on the community, on the social circle, and the friends of the victim and the families. Many of these youngsters are were said to have suffered from depression, low self-esteem, or addiction, and other mental challenges. Today we have with us Maureen Elliott of the Distress Centres of Greater Toronto, formerly known as Spectra, and she is with the Peel side of the organization. We'll chat about this subject, and which is so important and of great social relevance to us now. Maureen, could you tell us something about your work?
Absolutely. So, Distress Centres of Greater Toronto is a collective of 5 sites across Toronto and the GTA. The 2 Peel sites make up what was formerly Spectra Helpline. So we are first and foremost a helpline. We are open and available to anyone calling in. While our general catchment is primarily Peel, we don't turn anyone away. So we will take calls from anyone who's calling. We are a 24/7 helpline, and we are primarily volunteer operated as well. In addition to our inbound helpline programs, we also have several outbound programs, including a telecheck for seniors specifically, and we also have a 16+ touching base program for those experiencing mental health issues.
So how does, what kind of public education and awareness, how does that help in preventing suicides?
Awareness tends to reduce stigma, and by reducing stigma, we create a space where people can openly speak about suicide, about mental health issues, and this helps to allow people to access the support that they need to get better and to hopefully access other resources outside of and including a helpline.
So what are the child and youth, suicide screening tools available? What are those tools? And how?
Sorry, what tools are available
for? The screening, some sort of screening process of who are at risk? Is there something like that?
Anyone can be at risk of suicide or depression, mental health issues. It affects everyone across Canada. Suicide is not, does not discriminate, and it is something that can affect anyone.
This is that among youngsters, the suicide is the second largest cause of death after accidents. Mm-hmm. So what do we do going forward?
I think the more we speak about it and the more that we implement and make available community services, specifically mental health specific services, the more we reduce stigma, the better that our youth are going to be able to access these services and feel like they can speak about what they're going through, and the sooner they're able to speak about it, the more likely they're able to get the support that they need.
So is this linked to depression or is it addiction or is it a combination of both? What exactly are these mental issues that you come across?
Rainbow of different issues, and it can be anything from somebody just experiencing a single episode to someone who has experienced depression kind of chronically. Depression and suicide can go hand in hand, but it's not the be-all and end-all. So suicide can affect someone who has not had a diagnosis of depression.
So can medical professionals help?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. So Distress Centres Greater Toronto, in addition to just providing, listening support, we can also provide referrals to those who are open and welcome to it. If someone is looking for counseling, if they're looking for a medical professional, we can absolutely do our best to provide them with that information.
What kind of technology would help in this? Is there something available?
I think a lot of the times people feel very isolated. So, in addition, while it's really important, I think, to have all of these wonderful technological devices, it can sometimes create some isolation for people. So, socialization, reducing isolation is actually a huge benefit in terms of people's mental health. And so if I think the community aspect can sometimes help more than some of the technology aspects.
Medicines and drugs,
Oh yes, of
they are
course. Yeah, I
helping.
think dependent on person's individual circumstances, there is absolutely room for medication. We don't advocate for one thing or another. We advocate for what's right for the individual, and what's right for one person is not always going to work for someone else.
I mean, how can the parents or educationists recognize the risks? I mean, because they are in constant touch with the youngsters.
I think if you notice them pulling away or becoming very sort of socially isolated, maybe their mood has changed dramatically. Sometimes self-injurious behavior can be attached to it, but not always. I think just speaking with your child or speaking with somebody that you care about who you feel might not be might be experiencing suicide ideation, might be experiencing depression. Having that open conversation, sometimes the best thing to do is just ask them if they're thinking about suicide. Many people who are thinking about suicide won't bring it up themselves, and to be asked is often a relief, and that allows them to feel like the stigma has been reduced and that they can openly speak about what they're experiencing.
I've just read a report saying many of these youngsters try multiple times at committing suicide, isn't it?
Some people do experience multiple attempts. It's not the same across everyone, but yes, if you are someone who experiences suicide ideation, you may be more likely to attempt more than once.
So, say when after a suicide attempt, when they are admitted to a hospital, is there some sort of a transition program from the hospital to the community where they can sort of get better? Is there something
I think that, as to the best of my knowledge, there are supports put in place, connections to counseling. I'm not sure that there's any specific transition program, but I could be mistaken. Generally, if someone has been admitted to the hospital for an attempt, there's often a mental health hold, usually up to 72 hours, and then following which there would be some sort of counseling, hopefully put in place, some sort of referral or connection built within the hospital or within the medical community. With that being said, though, not every attempt is seen and not every attempt is reported. So there's also many attempts that we don't know have happened. Someone may have done it in isolation and not completed the act, in which case they may or may not have told anyone. And so they may not get the help that they need after that.
So, I mean, how is it easy to access mental health services available here in hospitals or in community centers and places like your?
It's getting easier than it was. I think there's a lot of increased access. There's a lot of increased education about mental health issues in the community. Unfortunately, there still is a lot of long wait times to get access to services. There are a lot of waiting lists, and sometimes services can be expensive, not always covered by OHIP, things like that. So they are available. Sometimes it's challenging to have access to them.
What kind of services are these?
There are
is it counseling?
Counseling, professional psychologists, psychotherapists. There's there's often like inpatient clinics, depending on what level of support you need. In terms of free services, there's Family Services of Peel, and the Mental Health Association of Canada. There's also other like free walk-in clinics that people can access if they need immediate support. Again, with those come wait times, as we all know. Any regular physical health walk-in clinic comes with a wait time. That would be the same for a mental health walk-in clinic as well. But I think there is a need to increase access. There's a need for additional funding into mental health services, but it's definitely been there's been an improvement in the last several years, certainly.
This will sort of integrate most of these organizations working together and sort of chart out a formula or chart out a program.
There has been some federal funding into a national suicide-specific helpline. It's both a text in and a voice helpline. It's a national service. So we are actually, Distress Centers of Greater Toronto is partnered with this organization. It's Crisis Services Canada is the overarching organization, and the service is called CSPS, so Crisis Service Prevention.
But tell me about your organization, the Greater Centers of Centre.
Absolutely. So Spectra Helpline, formerly Spectra Helpline, now Distress Centers Greater Toronto, is primarily a helpline service. So we are a 24/7, 365 service run by volunteers. Primarily, we have over 20,000 calls annually coming into our service.
That's a huge number.
It's a huge number. And then outside of that, we also have our outbound program. So we have a client registered base service, the Telecheck Seniors program, and our touching base service for 16 plus. For those services, we make over 60,000 calls a year.
60,000 calls
outbound to our clients. Yeah.
What are the main? I mean, how did most of them commit suicide? So jump from buildings or shoot themselves? I mean,
it sort of depends. Our main goal is to prevent and to de-escalate. So the method doesn't necessarily matter. It's the support is what's important. So we do our best when someone calls in, if they are in imminent risk, to get them to emergency services or get emergency services to them. If they are at high risk but they haven't acted on their ideation, we do our best to de-escalate and provide support and help them find mechanisms for coping.
Is the police and legal services involved in this thing sometimes?
Yes, we would get the police involved if someone has called in and specifically said that they've acted on some ideation or they've acted on their intent. So they've said, they've made some attempt to harm themselves and they've informed you of that. In which case we would then call the police, who would dispatch emergency services.
What does counseling entail? I mean, what do you tell these youngsters who have no hope, isn't it? That's why they do this thing.
So we use what's called solution-focused helping conversations as well as active listening. Our intention is to help people see the positive things in their life, to find mechanisms for coping, to identify supports in their life, to identify reasons for living, essentially. So that could be anything from a parent, a family member in general, a close friend. It could even be their pet. It could be their job, something that they connect with, that they really are passionate about, that they love, that they find is a reason for living that keeps them going. And we try to identify those things and focus on that in terms of helping to de-escalate and helping them to hold on to life as well.
There's no specific reason. Are any common thought or any commonality that you find among these people who
a lot of people have just lost hope. They feel like they're a burden to the people who love them. Sometimes they think everyone would be better off without them in their life. They might feel very alone or feel like they don't have anyone left. They might have experienced some sort of traumatic event. It could be anything from job loss to loss of life within their family. It could be a financial loss. Usually, though, people have experienced some sort of massive loss, whatever that means to them, and it has resulted in a loss of hope. And when people lose hope, that often affects their reasons for living.
Anything else you would like to tell me? How can the community help in this affair?
Absolutely. I think just being an advocate and also being an ally. If you notice someone who maybe just doesn't seem quite themselves, ask them if they're okay. Ask them if they need support. Learn about the mental health services in your community and be an advocate for them. You can also, if you want to go a step further, there's trainings like ASSIST, which is suicide-specific training. So you can help people who are experiencing suicide ideation, help in de-escalation. You could become a volunteer with Distress Centres of Greater Toronto. If you want to be very active in your community, Peel Distress Centres Greater Toronto. We're always looking for volunteers and are actively accepting applications. And you can also support us by going to events. We have a Survivor of Suicide Loss conference coming up in November, which is happening in Toronto. You can find information for that on the Toronto's Distress Centres of Toronto website, and that's coming up in November.
Do you have any problems with funding? I mean, or is it well funded?
We tend to have some consistent funders. We're absolutely supported in a massive way by Trillium, by Region of Peel, and the federal government through grants and things like that. United Way of Greater Toronto as well is a large funder of distress centres.
Yeah, so out of, you were saying about this 20,000 calls a year. I think many of these you were able to de-escalate the situation, isn't it?
Yes, so probably 10% of the calls that we get to the helpline mention suicide in some capacity. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're acting on anything, but they're experiencing suicide ideation from a low to a high risk situation. Of those 10%, less than 1% end up being what we call active rescue, which is when emergency services get involved. So we do our best, and we pride ourselves in being able to provide that service and help de-escalate situations. And this can also help reduce some of the number of calls that may have otherwise gone to 911, for example.
So do you train the volunteers who apply to join?
Absolutely, yep. Volunteers get a 3-day in-class training session. They're required to do about 8 to 12 hours of additional reading and watching of videos. There's a comprehensive test, and then they also get about 12 hours of on-the-lines training before they're allowed to be independent in the call center.
So applications can be done online or come at your office?
Applications can be done online. So if you just go to spectrehelpline.org and seek out the volunteer tab, you can find our applications there. We also have our general information line, so info@spectrehelpline.org, and you can reach out if you have any questions or if you're interested in volunteering.
Thank you, Maureen. I think we had a good discussion on the subject, and I think if we can spread some awareness in the community about this terrible issue, I think we will be successful then. In many ways, you're doing a wonderful job, and thank you a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.